Have you ever felt the temperature in your relationship drop before you had a single piece of concrete proof? It is a subtle, unsettling sensation that starts in the pit of your stomach long before any definitive evidence comes to light. The text messages that used to be filled with emojis and quick replies suddenly turn into one-word answers hours later. The inside jokes that used to make her laugh effortlessly now feel forced, met with a polite but hollow smile. The natural warmth and enthusiasm that anchored your daily interactions dissolve into a cool, distant politeness. Suddenly, you find yourself feeling like an uninvited competitor in a race you did not even know you signed up for, frantically trying to regain a position you thought was secure. A lot of men make the mistake of waiting for absolute proof, a hidden message, a revealing notification, or a dramatic confession before they trust their intuition. High-value men, however, understand that waiting for proof is a reactionary trap. They choose to pay attention to patterns instead. When another man enters a woman's orbit, the initial change is rarely something tangible that you can capture in a screenshot. What changes first is her internal hierarchy of priority. Her attention shifts long before her explicit actions do, and her emotional orientation moves before you can point to a single concrete infraction. If you are deeply tuned into the relationship dynamic, you will feel this psychological drift happening in real time long before you can prove it to anyone else. To navigate this without losing your composure, you have to look at what this attention drift actually looks like in everyday life, stripped of panic and hyperbole. The most immediate indicator is a permanent alteration in her response patterns. This is not about a single chaotic day at the office, a temporary family emergency, or a stressful Tuesday afternoon where her mind is understandably occupied elsewhere. You are looking for a sustained, consistent new norm where low effort becomes the baseline rather than the exception. She used to send you spontaneous good morning texts without any prompting from your side, sharing minor updates about her morning routine because she wanted you integrated into her day. Now, the burden of initiating every single conversation falls entirely on your shoulders. If you do not text her, the phone stays completely silent. When she does reply, the structure of her communication changes fundamentally. The lengthy voice notes, detailed stories, and enthusiastic responses are replaced by short, dry, and heavily delayed messages. It is an undeniable psychological reality that when someone matters to you, you find time for them regardless of your schedule. A woman who is genuinely excited about a man does not repeatedly forget to check her phone or run out of things to say. When split attention becomes the underlying reality, she will consistently find excuses for her absence because her primary mental focus has been redirected toward a new, more stimulating option. Beyond the frequency of communication, the qualitative depth of your conversations will experience a massive decline. Even when she sits across from you or replies to your messages, the interaction feels completely flat, as though you are speaking to a polite stranger rather than an intimate partner. She stops asking follow-up questions about your life, your goals, or your emotional state. The genuine curiosity that once drove her to understand your perspective completely vanishes. When you share something important about your day, she offers a passive acknowledgement rather than building on what you are saying or exploring the topic further. When attraction is vibrant and exclusive, a woman naturally leans into the relationship, seeking deeper emotional proximity and looking for ways to bridge the gap between your separate worlds. But when her focus is divided, she begins to conserve her emotional energy, offering you the absolute bare minimum required to maintain the status quo. This emotional pullback is not an accident. It is a subconscious conservation of resources. She is no longer investing her thoughts, her curiosity, or her excitement into your shared bond because that emotional capital is actively being spent elsewhere, leaving you with the superficial remnants of a once vibrant connection. This brings us to the highly selective nature of her availability, which becomes increasingly obvious as the days progress. You will find that she is suddenly too busy, too exhausted, or too overwhelmed to accommodate you. Yet her calendar remains perfectly open for everyone and everything else. Plans that you made days in advance get pushed back at the last minute with vague justifications, Phone calls are cut short due to sudden obligations, and the time you do spend together feels tightly compressed, as if you are being squeezed into a narrow, inconvenient slot between her real priorities. This sudden scheduling friction is never random. People inherently make time for the things, activities, and individuals that excite them the most. If a person is highly motivated to see you, they will moving mountains to make it happen. If they are looking for a way out, they will manufacture a textbook full of logistical hurdles. Think back to the beginning of your own relationship, or any time you were deeply captivated by someone. Did you struggle to find a few seconds to type a reply, or were you actively looking for any possible excuse to initiate contact? The answer is obvious. When her availability becomes a series of negotiations and compromises, she is actively reordering her internal priorities. She stops planning dates, completely ceases to suggest activities for the two of you to enjoy together, and stops sending those random, unprompted photos or life updates that signify a shared daily experience. Those small, seemingly trivial gestures are the vital investments that prove active emotional interest. When they vanish, it indicates that the psychological spotlight of attraction has pivoted away from you and toward a new horizon. The moment another man establishes a presence within her social or professional orbit, an automated psychological mechanism triggers inside her mind. Even if she considers herself a person of high integrity and has no conscious intention of cheating, her brain will subconsciously begin benchmarking your traits against this new individual. This process is an inherent human tendency, but in the context of a relationship, it manifests as a sudden and jarring shift in her expectations and standards. The exact same personality traits, quirks, and habits that once made her laugh, feel secure, or fall in love with you are suddenly viewed through an entirely different lens. What she previously praised as stability and reliability might now be framed as boring, rigid, and entirely predictable. The comfortable routines you built together, which once provided a sense of peaceful sanctuary, are suddenly critiqued as stagnant or uninspired. This sudden friction does not necessarily mean the other man possesses superior qualities, higher intelligence, or greater capability than you do. Rather, it is a direct result of the neurological spike in stimulation that accompanies novelty. The human brain interprets anything unfamiliar as highly intense and exciting, and that sudden rush of chemicals can easily distort a person's objective evaluation of long-term value. Unfamiliarity masquerades as depth, causing her to view your established relationship as dull simply because it is familiar. When this comparison energy begins to take root, it will invariably project outward into her behavior through three distinct, simultaneous indicators that you must learn to recognize without reacting emotionally. The first sign is a sharp increase in overt criticism. Small, harmless habits that you have had for years, things she never once mentioned or perhaps even found endearing in the past, are suddenly magnified into major character flaws. She will offer unsolicited commentary on your style, your communication, your ambition, or your daily routines, subtly signaling that you are falling short of a new, unspoken standard. The second sign is a calculated emotional distancing. As she internalizes this comparison, she will naturally step back from intense emotional intimacy to create a psychological buffer zone. This buffer allows her to assess her options from a distance without feeling the immediate guilt of leading you on or fully committing to either side. The third sign is a pronounced ambiguity regarding the future. If you attempt to bring up long-term plans, upcoming vacations, or milestones that require mutual commitment months down the line, she will suddenly become vague, non-committal, or redirect the conversation entirely. Discussions about the future require a certainty that she no longer possesses, so she avoids anchoring herself to a timeline with you while her mind is actively entertaining a different trajectory. This environment of comparison is incredibly challenging because it exposes any underlying stagnation in your life faster than almost anything else. If you have been coasting on your past achievements, letting your physical health slip, or allowing your personal drive to weaken because you felt you had permanently won her affection, this is the exact moment those vulnerabilities become glaringly visible. However, achieving emotional maturity means accepting a fundamental truth. You cannot control the thoughts, desires, or internal comparisons of another human being. Humans are wired to evaluate their environment and their options. What you can control entirely is whether or not you remain an evolving, highly competitive force within your own lane. The absolute worst mistake a man can make during this phase is to ask the wrong question, which usually sounds like, how do I beat this other guy? The moment your strategy becomes centered around defeating an external rival, you have already lost your footing. The correct high-value question you must ask yourself is, am I consistently evolving as a man, or have I allowed comfort to make me complacent? Comfort is the ultimate assassin of romantic tension, and tension is the very fuel that sustains raw attraction. If you lose your emotional grounding and succumb to insecurity, jealousy, or anger while she is navigating this comparison energy, you instantly validate her doubts and lower your perceived value in her eyes. The presence of another man does not mean she has made a final decision to leave. It means she is in a phase of active reassessment. If you remain completely steady, focused on your purpose, and emotionally unshakable, that reassessment very often swings heavily back in your favor because true strength is rare and immensely attractive. To truly understand where you stand, you have to bypass the superficial excuses and ask yourself a brutally honest question that cuts straight to the core of your self-worth. If the woman you are with met you today for the first time in your exact current physical, financial, and mental state, would she choose you without a single moment of hesitation? If you look in the mirror and realize that you have allowed yourself to become a watered-down, comfortable version of the driven man she initially fell for, then her behavioral shift is an expected consequence of that decline. Insecurity will tempt you to argue, demand reassurance, or force her to profess her loyalty, but those actions only project weakness. Attraction cannot be negotiated, bargained for, or demanded through guilt. It is an instinctual response to value, strength, and behavioral consistency. When a woman notices that another man's presence does not cause you to flinch, panic, or compromise your dignity, she is forced to recognize that your confidence is anchored internally, not dependent on her constant validation. This realization alone can break the spell of novelty that the other man represents, reminding her that an anchored, self-determined man is incredibly difficult to replace. As the underlying dynamic continues to deteriorate, the shift in her internal alignment will inevitably reflect in the specific language she uses to describe her life and the relationship. This is the stage where you will notice a significant rise in what can be described as independence framing. You will hear her repeat phrases like, I just really need some space right now. I need to focus entirely on myself and my career. I am trying to figure out who I am outside of a relationship, or I really don't want anything too heavy or serious at this point in my life. Taken individually and completely out of context, none of these statements are inherently alarming or indicative of a problem. It is entirely healthy for a person to require periods of solitude, and personal growth often demands a high degree of autonomy and self-reflection. However, in the realm of relationship psychology, context is the ultimate determinant of meaning. When these specific declarations of independence suddenly appear alongside a noticeable decrease in her relationship investment, a pattern of selective availability, and an undercurrent of comparison energy, they are never random coincidences. What you are actually witnessing is a calculated psychological restructuring of the connection. She is using the concept of independence to build a behavioral bridge away from the relationship while minimizing her own accountability. To deal with this effectively, you have to unpack exactly what is happening behind those words on a psychological level. When a woman consistently emphasizes her need for space in this specific context, she is actively loosening the emotional attachment bonds that tie her to you. By introducing the narrative of space, she creates a functional boundary that drastically reduces her daily obligations and accountability to the relationship. It allows her to create a guilt-free environment where she can explore new external options, test the waters with another individual, and assess her feelings without having to formally or permanently end things with you first. It is, in its truest sense, a soft exit strategy. It allows her to slowly drift away rather than facing the intense conflict and emotional discomfort of an abrupt breakup. The critical nuance that most men entirely miss during this phase is the underlying tone of the delivery. If a woman is genuinely experiencing immense external stress from her career, family, or personal life, and truly just needs breathing room to process her emotions, her communication will remain fundamentally anchored to you. She will actively reassure you of her love, validate the stability of the relationship, and make it clear that her need for space is a temporary coping mechanism, not a rejection of your bond. Conversely, when the demand for space is wrapped in an impenetrable vagueness about the future, an emotional coldness, and a refusal to define boundaries, it is a clear signal that she is uncertain about her commitment to you because her curiosity is being pulled towards someone else. This independence narrative almost always goes hand in hand with a process called social repositioning, where she begins altering her public lifestyle to reflect her internal emotional transition. You will notice that she starts spending a vast amount of her free time out of the house, attending social gatherings, or exploring new circles without ever extending an invitation to you. She will place a heavy, explicit emphasis on how much she thoroughly enjoys doing things completely alone or exclusively with her friends, and she may begin highlighting this newfound solo identity across her social media platforms. Again, there is absolutely nothing wrong with an independent lifestyle, but when a woman who previously cherished your shared social life suddenly weaponizes the concept of independence to exclude you from her world, she is actively transitioning her identity from us to me. This is precisely where the vast majority of men completely sabotage their remaining value. They hear the words, "I need space," panic sets in, and they respond entirely out of fear. They overcompensate by calling more frequently, sending paragraphs of text begging for clarity, demanding to know where they stand, and showing up unexpectedly to force an emotional resolution. This suffocating pressure does nothing but validate her internal narrative, proving to her that you are an anxious, dependent partner, which ultimately accelerates her desire to escape the relationship entirely. A high-value response to this scenario requires an immense amount of self-control and an entirely different behavioral framework. The moment she informs you that she requires space, you must calmly, confidently, and completely grant it to her without a single shred of passive aggression, resentment, or emotional pleading. You do not argue against her logic, nor do you try to convince her that the relationship is worth fighting for in that moment. Instead, you match her energy by instantly reducing your own availability and matching her step for step in pulling back. You completely cease chasing updates on her day. You refuse to monitor her daily movements or social media activity, and you redirect every ounce of your focus toward expanding the parameters of your own life. This creates a powerful psychological paradox. If her request for space was truly a genuine, innocent need for self-focus and personal decompression, your calm, respectful, and grounded response will actually skyrocket her attraction and respect for you, as it proves you are not a needy or controlling burden. On the other hand, if her independence talk was simply a convenient cover story to explore her options with another man, your instant total detachment will strip away her safety net and expose her true level of investment faster than any confrontation ever could. Clinging desperately to a pulling partner only delays clarity. Total, unshakable calmness accelerates the arrival of the absolute truth. When you have systematically observed these shifting patterns and confirmed that her emotional attention is actively divided, you must immediately transition your mindset from passive analysis to decisive action. The absolute foundational rule of engagement in this high-stakes scenario is that you must never, under any circumstances, resort to interrogation. The psychological instinct for many men when they feel their position threatened is to launch into a frantic series of accusatory questions. Who is this guy? Why have you been acting so different lately? Are you talking to someone else behind my back? Or, do you even care about us anymore? You must understand that interrogation completely destroys attraction on impact. The moment you begin demanding answers and firing off anxious questions, you completely invert the emotional power dynamic of the relationship. Instead of standing as the grounded, self assured presence in the room, you transform into an insecure, reactive child who is desperately begging for reassurance from a partner who is already emotionally checked out. Interrogation forces her into a defensive posture where she will likely lie, minimize, or deflect to avoid conflict, yielding you zero truth while simultaneously draining whatever respect she had left for you. Your weapon of choice must always be silent, meticulous observation rather than premature confrontation. Observation is inherently calm, measured, and completely quiet. You step back mentally and allow her the complete freedom to act however she chooses, while you quietly monitor her consistency over a sustained timeline. You listen intently to the shifting tone of her voice, you notice the micro shifts in her daily effort levels, and you track her behavioral patterns without ever announcing to her that you are doing so. There is an immutable psychological principle that dictates that human beings reveal their true nature and intentions only when they do not feel actively cornered or monitored. If a woman feels pressured or accused, her survival brain activates, and she will hide her tracks and defend her ego. But if she feels entirely free and unwatched, she will naturally and inevitably expose her true level of integrity and investment through her organic behavior. By maintaining absolute composure and refusing to confront her until you have undeniable clarity, you preserve your dignity and keep your value intact. Your composure serves as a mirror that reflects her actions back onto her without your emotions clouding the reality of the situation. Simultaneously, you must immediately execute a plan to dramatically increase your personal value without wasting a single day wallowing in confusion. This is the exact moment you must redirect the emotional energy that would have been spent worrying about the relationship and channel it entirely into self-mastery. You expand the scope of your life by sharpening your career ambitions, aggressively upgrading your physical health and appearance in the gym, and diversifying your focus so that your mind is occupied by tangible goals. You must deliberately reduce your emotional overavailability. If a woman senses that despite her cold behavior, her mixed signals, and her distant energy, you are still sitting around like an anxious safety net waiting by the phone for her occasional text, all incentive for her to treat you with respect completely vanishes. When your presence feels steady, solid, and principled, but fundamentally unavailable to someone who treats you as an option, she is forced to undergo a massive internal recalibration. She must realize that your presence in her life is a privilege that can be permanently revoked if her investment drops below a standard of mutual respect. Finally, you must master the psychological art of preparing for loss without a single ounce of panic or desperation. You have to accept a fundamental law of human relationships. A partner who can be easily swayed, distracted, or pulled away by the superficial novelty of another man was never truly anchored to you in the first place. If the mere presence of an external option is enough to completely disrupt your position and cause her to devalue what you built, the hard truth is that your connection lacked a deep, authentic security from the very beginning. Discovering this reality is not a personal failure, nor is it a reflection of your worth as a man. It is simply objective feedback regarding her character and her true level of alignment with you. A truly high-value man does not chase, does not beg, and does not compete with another individual for a woman's affection. If she chooses to entertain another option, you must have the self-respect to step aside completely, close the door behind you, and allow her to experience the full reality of life without you. Your greatest asset is your capacity to walk away from anything that no longer respects your value, knowing that an anchored, purpose-driven man is an irreplaceable force.